Hey friends, welcome back. So excited to have you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about my 5-star reads from 2024. This should be the last video wrapping up 2024 for the year, so I hope that you guys really enjoy this video, and I'm not going to ramble too much because I always do that, so we're going to jump into it. There are 9 books that made 5 stars for me in the year of 2024. I read 40 books in total in 2024, so these are the top 9 5-star reads that I had. And then I'm going to also have a honorable mention at the end of the list as well. These are not in any particular order. They're just the order of the books that I read them in. So without further ado, the first 5-star read that I had of 2024. The first 5-star read of 2024 would be The Song of Achilles. You guys, this book, first of all, this video is going to be me just going this book 17 times. Regardless, I read The Song of Achilles in the beginning of 2024. This was like one of the first books that I read, and oh my gosh, it actually was the first book I read of 2024 and was not disappointed at all. This is such a good book. It actually caused me to pick up Circe by Madeline Miller as well. I also have read that one. It did not make my top 5 of 2024. I did read it last year. It was good, but it was not a 5-star read. The Song of Achilles was a 5-star read. The character list wasn't super confusing for The Song of Achilles, and I don't know if that's because, a little known fact about me, I actually love watching period piece movies. So I've seen Troy and a bunch of movies that depict Achilles in them. So with that, I kind of already knew what the story was for the most part. So reading the book, I was able to connect the names to characters from the movies, so that helped me a lot. I can't really remember the faces of anyone, obviously, other than Brad Pitt, who played Achilles, but all that to say, I loved this book so very much. The characters were easy to follow. The story was amazing. The way that it was described and depicted, I absolutely love the love in this story. I cried. I cried so much in the end. The last 2 chapters of this book just tore me apart. It's so good. This is such a good book. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. If you like period pieces or historical retellings, I think this is an amazing book to get. So for Circe, the reason why I didn't give it a 5-star is because the character following of there were so many characters in Circe, way too many characters, and I could not follow the people and the understanding of who they all were. It was just way too confusing for me. But I also didn't know the story of Circe, so that's also why I think that one didn't click as hard for me as The Song of Achilles did. It was really good though, so I do recommend it. If you, again, like historical retellings, I would definitely recommend reading Circe, but I highly recommend reading The Song of Achilles because this book was amazing, is amazing, so good. Chef's kiss. The second book on my list I don't have a physical copy of yet, and I probably won't get a physical copy if I'm being honest, but the second book on my list is Serpent and the Wings of Night. I loved reading this book. It was so fun. This was the second book I read in 2024 that was a 5-star. It was so good, so much fun, just an exciting thing to read. I really have gotten into reading a lot more fantasy and kind of more specifically romantasy, but I really like these fantasy books. I think they're fun, low stakes, no thoughts, head empty. It's just a fun, goofy, silly time, and I think that's why this got a 5-star. It's not because it's literally written in the most amazing way or anything crazy like that. It just was fun. I enjoyed it. I loved the little vampire situation. I love me a little vampire situation. So I just had a lot of fun reading that one. I am working on currently reading book 2 in the series, so I'm planning to continue reading the series of the Nyaxia, I believe that's how you say it. Nyaxia, I don't know. Series by Carissa Broadbent, but that was a good book. I really enjoyed it. I had a fun time. It's kind of the second time that I've really had a fun time reading a fantasy book like that. I attribute my going back to reading and getting back into reading to ACOTAR. Let's not talk about how awful that series is. But not having read for so long, I jumped into ACOTAR and just ate it up and was like, oh my god, this is so much fun. This is so it was low stakes and just so fun and interesting and something new that I'd never read before for me. So ACOTAR got me back into reading. This was a lot more fun for me in the sense that, like, now that I've started reading again, I was like, okay, this is what an actual 5-star fantasy romance is to me, not ACOTAR. I no longer stand by ACOTAR being the best fantasy series, but I do think it is a good one to get you back into reading if you've been out of reading for a long time. So do what you will with that information. Book number 3 that got a 5-star for me this year, I also don't have a physical copy of, but that would be A Crown of Midnight. This is the 3rd book-ish. I don't know what actual order these books came out in, but I'm reading it as the 2nd book, but it is one of the books in the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. I am reading the series. I will not be doing a vlog of me reading the series because I don't think it's that interesting, and also because I have already started it. So I'll probably have it in like a reading vlog where I'm reading the books randomly, but that's just where we are. I've read Throne of Glass. I have now read Crown of Midnight, and the next book is Assassin's Blade that I'm going to be reading. I have not started that one yet, so we'll get there when we get there. But I have read Crown of Midnight. That was the 3rd book that got a 5-star for me in 2024. I don't know if I still stand by that rating. I don't know that that series is actually that great, in my opinion. I don't know if I'm feeling like, I don't know if Throne of Glass is like the series I think it was, or thought it would be. It actually feels very juvenile to me, and I don't know if it was meant to be a young adult book or not, but it doesn't feel like the adult fantasy I thought it was going to be. So there's that, but I'm still reading it. I'm enjoying it. It's a silly, goofy, no thoughts kind of time, so enjoying that. Book number 4, I also don't have a physical copy of. I will be getting a physical copy of this book at some point though, and I really would like to have like a special edition of this book, but that book would be The Reformatory. I loved that book. It did take me a while to read. It is very long, but it was so good. It was such a good story. The way that that story was told with the spirits and oh my gosh, you guys, such a good haunted story. It does have a lot of dark themes, and that is part of the reason why it took me so long as well to read, because I just needed a break every now and then. Being a person of color, reading a book about a person of color being tormented, not the best of times, right? Not something I really want to like sit down and have a like cuddle cozy time reading, but it was written so well. The book was amazing. I love it so much. I want to read more books by Tananarive Due. I think she's amazing, and I hope that I can get my hands on some other books from her and potentially read those this year, but that book was so wonderful. I don't want to go into like spoilers or anything about what it was about, but ultimately this young black boy gets sent to a reformatory, and all kinds of crazy wackadoo bullcrap happens that this little kid has to deal with and his family has to deal with, and it's just their story. The way the book ended was beautiful and amazing. If you have not read it, I do highly recommend reading The Reformatory. It is a spooky, scary, fun time with also some real life heavy elements kind of entwined in the story. It is based off of some like true events and real events that have happened in history, especially ones that we've unearthed as of present time. So I do recommend reading it if you haven't yet, but it is such a good, horrifying, literally horrifying story. So Reformatory. The next book that we're going to talk about is amazing. I loved it, and I've talked about it already in some other videos. The 5th 5-star that I gave in 2024 was to Misery by Stephen King. What? I'm sorry, what? Stephen King. Yes, this author has written 1,000,001 books. These books are so old, these stories are so old, and yet and still, this was so good. I have seen the movie 1,000,001 times, so I was like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be like interested in this book because I've watched the movie. I've seen the movie like 17 times. Why am I gonna want to read the book after I've already seen the movie? I still highly recommend this if you have watched the movie and you've never read the book. Reading it is something different, and there are different things in the book that aren't in the movie, so I do think that that's worth a like read anyway, because they always do that, right? But this was so good, you guys. Again, for the 15,000th time, this was such a good book. I highly recommend it. I absolutely love one of the things that he did in this book, which was part of the storyline is the author gets stranded and crazy things happen. But one of the things I like about the book is he actually puts in typewritten words into this book, and it's like you getting to see the author write the story in the book. I think that was so cool. I love the mixed media thing. It's something I talked about when I was reading We Used to Live Here. I just love seeing mixed media in books, and that's one of the reasons why I want to read episode 13 so bad, because it also has mixed media in it. So highly recommend Misery. It's, you know the story, you've seen the movie, but this book is good, okay? The way it's written is good. It is one of those books, I think, like what everyone was talking about with We Used to Live Here, how it was like a slow, creepy, like things are just progressively getting worse creepily, and we're just like, what is going on? I think Misery does that, but in a much better way, in my opinion. I just loved the way that this was written and how it went through the story and the timeline. Again, Misery by Stephen King. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. I also want to read Salem's Lot by Stephen King, but I'm kind of waiting until the cool cover comes out for it, because they've come out with new cool covers for some of his books, and I want that cover on Salem's Lot. So if they do that, that would be lovely. My 6th 5-star read of 2024 and my favorite book of 2024, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I read this from Libby Audiobooks, and I got my husband to buy me a special edition physical copy because I loved this story so much. I've said it before, I'm not really a romance girl. I don't love romance stories. I went into The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue not really understanding what this book was going to be about. I thought that this book was going to be about like an immortal vampire. That's what I was told. It's an immortal, and I think maybe I assumed vampire because immortal to me says vampire, and that's not what happened here, let's be honest. But what did happen in here is absolutely beautiful. V.E. Schwab writes beautifully. The way that this book was written was absolutely gorgeous. Just, I cannot get over some of the quotes in here, some of the way that they talked about things. I also read this when I was probably 2 or 3 weeks postpartum. And so there was a lot of conversation about time and how much time we have in the world and in life, and how it's over so quickly for some, and for some it takes forever. And just thinking about that in conjunction with having a newborn baby, it was, I cried. I cried so many times in this book. It is absolutely beautiful. If you have not read it, I do highly recommend it. It is she's a little bit chunky. She's a little bit thick, but it's good and it's worth it. And you don't have to read it all at one time. You can read it in settings. That's what I did. I didn't read it all at once, but it's still such a beautiful book. I also do highly recommend, if you're someone who likes to annotate, tab, highlight, to get the physical copy, because girl, there's so much in here. There's so many bangers in here, and you're gonna love it. The 7th 5-star read of 2024 that I had was, and I do not have a physical copy of it because I read it on Kindle Unlimited, The Haar. Y'all, what is this book? What is this book? What is it? Good. That's what it was. It was so good. It was so fun. I didn't know what I was getting into, honestly, but I loved it. If y'all haven't read it, read it. It took over my booktube friends all over the place in the end of 2024. Gavin reads it all, read it, and was like, this was so good. And I was like, you said so? I'm gonna read it. I think Books and Lala read it also. I think a bunch of the booktubers were reading it all at one time. They all just were like, I heard about this book, and so I'm reading it. I read it. It was wonderful. It was written so well. It was so much fun. It was just it was so fun. It is spooky and creepy and weird, and I did not understand sometimes where we were going and what we were doing, but it was beautiful also. The story was beautiful. I think I got into this interesting thing towards the end of the year with my reading, that I was reading a lot of books about time and family and love and those sorts of elements, and whether they are good, bad, ugly, just those kinds of elements in stories, and they were getting 5 stars, as they should. So I don't know if this all has to do with the fact that I was pregnant and had a baby at the end of the year, and so that's where all of these 5 stars started coming out of the wazoo from. But The Haar, I loved it. You'll love it. If you like spooky, ghosty, creature feature type of books, read The Haar. I do recommend. Read the Haar. It's lovely. Weird. You've been warned. But lovely. So good. Book number 8 that got a 5-star from me this year that I don't have a physical copy of yet again. Quicksilver. I loved it. Oh my gosh. So I talked about ACOTAR at the beginning here, right? ACOTAR was one of my favorite reads when I first started reading again. I was like, this is so good. I ate them up. I read all of those books so fast, y'all. It's not even funny. Your girl was obsessed. I was telling everyone about how obsessed I was with them. Again, on reflection, they're not that good. When I got to the last book, I was pissed because it was terrible. Absolute trash. Anyway, Quicksilver. Why am I talking about that? Because Quicksilver is everything ACOTAR wasn't. Y'all, that book was so good. We've got fairies, we've got other worlds, we've got an actual disaster that means something that we really follow and we actually understand. Like, we have villains that are actual villains that we actually see things happening with. Quicksilver is what ACOTAR wanted to be but never made it to. And that's the truth. I'm not trying to hurt feelings. I'm just telling you the truth. If you liked ACOTAR or you thought ACOTAR was too childish, read Quicksilver because I think it's going to do it for you. It was such a good book. I can't wait for book 2. I will immediately be snagging that as soon as it comes out. And I will also be getting a physical copy of Quicksilver because that was such a fun time. It gave me, like I said, it gave me kind of ACOTAR vibes, but also like Fourth Wing kind of vibes with the relationship situation. The way that the relationship progressed in the book was beautiful. We saw it coming, but it was beautiful, and I loved how it was put together and how not overwhelming and how quick it was. I just, so good. So good. Highly recommend it. Please read it. And our final 9th book of the year that got a 5-star in 2024 is Dearest. I've talked about it already. You've heard me talk about this, and you're gonna hear me talk about it again. Such a good book. Best book I read after Addie LaRue. I think this is my 2nd favorite book of the year. So good. Such a fun read. Again, I think I enjoyed this because it was at the right time in my life. I specifically bought this book because I was like, oh, this is about a woman who just had a baby. I want to read about that. I don't care that it's a horror book with a woman who just had a baby. What? Angel, what's wrong with you? I still read it. I still read it. And y'all, I promise you, I did not know what I was getting into when I started this. And in the beginning, it was fun. It was silly, goofy. I also felt like I highly resonated with the mom in this book in the beginning because, y'all, if you don't have a newborn child, I know people talk about all the time how tired you'll be and how exhausting it is and da 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 da. They don't really tell you what it is. And that's on women need to do better. We have got to like really spell it out sometimes because y'all did not tell me. When you said I was never going to sleep again, one, that's too, you're being too overly dramatic, right? What you meant to say was you're only going to get to sleep for like 30 minutes to an hour every time your baby goes to sleep because you're breastfeeding and you have to clean your own pumps. And this character goes through all the things that I went through. All the things that I went through as a first-time mom. And the way that she talked about it was just, it felt, I resignated. At a certain point, I stopped resignating because, again, this is a horror novel. I will say no harm comes to the child in this book because I know that's something that triggers people. The child in this book is not harmed, so we're okay there. But I will say what does unfold, girl, you're not ready. Read it. Just read it. Please read it. Even if you don't have kids, read it. It's good. It's insightful. It's fun. It's creepy. Paranormal vibes. It's a good time. All right. So that was my 9 books that got 5 stars in 2024. For my honorable mention book, I'm going to talk about Lakewood, which was a 4.5 star. It is one of the only books that got 4.5 stars for me in 2024. This book was really, really good. The reason I ended up not giving it a 5 star was just because, I don't know, it was missing something. There was an element to this that was missing. I can't put my finger on it, to be honest with you, but it didn't hit all the way. It just didn't hit all the way. And I think it did hit for me, and a reason why is because I am a psychology major, as I've said before. This is following a person of color going through a psychological experience, an experiment, and what that process is and what that looks like. I think the reason I ended up not giving it a 5 stars because I felt like there were some holes in the story and there were some pieces in there that just didn't make sense and it never really connected. So that's part of the reason why I never ended up giving it 5 stars. But this is such a good book. Again, this is following a like true event in history and in time, so it's kind of taking a kind of like with like Circe and Song of Achilles, we're taking a historical literature and making it into a retelling, if you will. That's kind of what this is. There's a historical event that they retell in a different way. It very much follows some historical events that have happened to Black people of color in America when it comes to psychological experiments. So it is good. I do highly recommend it. It also will have you thinking and make you like be like, wait, what are we doing here? And how are we doing this? And why would we do this? Because this is something that really happened in America. And I think it's crazy and wild. And it kind of still happens to this day. Because people suck and people are awful and people are desperate in this world. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. So I do love this book. I do recommend it if you are someone who likes more of a psychological book. This is literally psychological, but it's also like twisty-turny. I don't know where we're going, don't know what's really happening, don't know who to trust. This book's got you. It got you. So that's my top reads for 2024. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please let me know down below if you've read any of these books. If you haven't read any of them, did any of them sound interesting to you? I would love to know if we had any books in common. I think it's very interesting whenever I see some of my booktubes people that I watch and see like, oh, I hated that book and you loved that book. So I would love to know if you guys have read any of these books. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, let me know. Let's have a chat about it in the comments, and I will talk with you guys in my next video. See you later, friends. Bye.